Welcome to the Distillers Institute Podcast. I'm your host, Anne Gigney. I'll speak with experienced distillery owners who have launched and grown their own distilling business, and we'll share their wins, their successes, their challenges, and find out just what it takes to make a great distilling business. Hi, and welcome to the Distillers Institute Podcast. Today we're catching up with my friend and inspirational distiller, Patrick Maguire from Maguire and Co Distilling. Most folks know Patrick from his history as the managing director of Sullivans Cove Distillery. He was at the helm when Sullivans Cove won their world's best whisky award back in 2014. Patrick's an inspiring fellow. He has helped quite a number of the folks in the industry in Tasmania and more broadly in Australia, and is an inspirational leader when it comes to the distilling industry. Absolutely delighted to have Patrick on the podcast today, our inaugural podcast, and we hope you enjoy. So thanks, Patrick Maguire, joining us today from, well, let's call it sunny Tasmania. Clearly not in the distillery there, Pat, but let's imagine that you are. Give us a little bit of background about who you are and the name and everything of your distillery.
Yeah, there's a bit of, I guess there's a little bit of a story, but I'll try and cut it short. Yeah, it isn't. It's a lovely sunny day here today, so got to be happy with that. But it's always like that in Tasmania, as we know. But for me, on the distilling side of things, I guess originally I started, like a lot of people did, with larks back in the very early days. Bill and Lynn Lark, friends of mine, when they first got going, when they started distilling a little bit at their home in Kingston, south of Hobart. I went there once or twice to have a look and see what they were doing and help them do a bit of bottling on the kitchen table and all this sort of stuff. Then I sort of migrated on to doing a little bit of work for them in those days that they moved out to Richmond. So I used to go and do a bit of work out there, and that was when I first got involved in, I wouldn't say working the still, but assisting them with that. And it just evolved from there. So I ended up moving on to trying to do a bit of distribution for them back in those days. And it was quite interesting because in those days, nobody really wanted to know. It was a very hard thing to get anybody interested in the whiskey. We were selling it, but it wasn't something anybody was expecting or anybody was thinking about, and they didn't really know how to approach it. So
How long ago was that, Pat? How long ago?
Oh, this is 30 years ago, at the very beginning of what they were doing. So it was a matter of trying to convince people that they were making a very genuine whiskey product. It wasn't a pretend thing by any means. It was, they were doing a bloody good job. But nobody could get their heads around an Australian-made whiskey at that time, which is strange because the main Australian whiskey industry died not long before they got going. So, and we all know about Maguire and others that were around when I was growing up as a kid. And yet we seem to forget quickly. So to get people back in gear with the idea of an Australian whiskey was a difficult thing to do in the earliest days.
And here we are on a little island, off a bigger island on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And had some ideas, yeah?
Yeah, well, it grew from there. But I got involved in, it was then called the Tasmania Distillery, which made Sullivans Cove whisky brand. And Bill Lark was invited along to manage that for the new owners. So the original owner sold it to the guys that I ended up working for. And Bill was the head distiller and all that sort of stuff at the time. And he managed the whole thing on behalf of the new partners. So we did that for a couple of years. And in that time, we produced 629 barrels of whiskey, I think, at the time, in a couple of years. And we were working 24/7 to do that. So there was a team of 4 of us working around the clock, making all this whiskey. So that was when I first got involved in actually making whiskey.
So, Pat, about 95, or was it a bit later on than that?
Oh, I'm just trying to think now. No, for me, it was probably 97 or 8 when I got involved, I think, something like that. But they had been going for a couple of years before that. But anyway, Bill left. And because at that stage, the Lark Distillery was starting to kick in. He needed to go back there. They had moved into town then in a Davy Street there, place we all know. And so I ended up in Bill's role as the manager there. So I did that for another couple of years. But unfortunately, for one reason or another, they didn't survive. So that business went into liquidation. And for a reason that still mystifies me, myself and a few others decided it'd be a good idea to buy the liquidated plant and stock and keep going, which when you think about it, after the fact that they'd been liquidated, it wasn't a very smart idea, I suppose. But anyway, that's what we did. So we got some financial backers together that were all part of that partnership, got going again. We moved from the site in there at the gasworks in Hobart out to Cambridge, where the distillery still is. So I set about trying to do the same thing. We were trying to not only produce a single malt whiskey, but we were trying to find markets for it as well. So that's where I really cut my teeth on what we were doing, started to really understand what we were making, how we're making it, but more importantly, just as importantly, I suppose, how to market it. Because I'm not a marketer, didn't really know how to approach it. Selling it in Australia was really difficult. It was a very hard sell at the time. But we found that selling it overseas was a lot easier. The European markets in particular were more receptive. So we ended up building a market over in Europe, or markets over in Europe, fairly rapidly. And that's really what got us going. So that gave us the income to actually start producing again, running the stills again full time, or pretty much full time.
So Patrick, just to sort of jump forward and I guess look back at the same time, you're talking here about Sullivans Cove Distillery, and we're not there yet, but we'll get to talk about Maguire and Co in a sec. What year are we talking here? So is this early 2000s for Sullivans Cove kicking off?
Yes, that would be 2004, 2005 that we ended up taking over. We mothballed the distillery for a while. We moved it out of where we were up to it was the Bogues warehouse in Hobart. We moved all the gear into there, sat there for a while, still trying to sell. Then the place became available down at Cambridge, the warehouse there, so we moved into there, and that's where we got going initially out at Cambridge. So what I set about doing there was trying to understand more about the product we were producing, and if you're making a single malt, what does the market look for? So I learned a lot about that at that time. And in the end, it came down to very simple stuff, like simple ingredients, attention to detail when it comes to distilling, or brewing, distilling, all those things, and maturation in the right casks. So like all these things there's no one that's more important than the other. They're all very important. So it was a big learning thing through all that process. And in those days too, there wasn't the internet as there is today. So it was not that easy to do the research online, and it wasn't that easy to find a lot of literature on it here either. So we made a lot of mistakes while we were doing that, I'd have to say. But we learned how to deal with them too. So there was a lot of good in that. But through that time, we started looking to send product off to various competitions to see if we could get anybody to tell us our whiskey was okay. And we did. We managed to pull a few very good awards. And so that really encouraged us to keep going and keep doing what we were doing. And it taught us how to select casks to bottle, that sort of thing. So it taught us the importance of really looking at each cask that you're going to bottle. Don't just go out there and grab a cask of whiskey and bottle it, and it'll all be fine. Because every barrel, every cask is different in its maturation, the way it presents, the way it tastes, different times, different years, all that sort of stuff. So it taught me a lot about that. And that's been one of the most important things for me anyway.
Well, that's such an important point, that whole conversation about casks and, knowing what you've just told us and knowing about the 2014 World's Best Whisky Award.
Well, that came along as later on as a part of all of that.
And so what did that 10 years look like? What did that 10 years or thereabouts from Sullivan's landing at Cambridge to that award actually look like for you? Because it's your growing up years really, isn't it, in distilling?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, there wasn't many of us doing it. There was only a few around Australia at that time that they were slowly coming on board with it. So it was interesting. We formed a couple of associations, the Tasmanian Whisky and Spirits Association, the Australian Distillers Association, because we sort of worked out we needed to speak to government about all sorts of things, including excise, but also for export support and all these things. So a small group of us, about four of us, were the ones that set these associations up and got all those things going. So I think that was a really good thing to do. Looking back now, we got a lot out of that, and we did get a lot of government support. There was no question. From that, I think more people got to know about it. All the work the small group of us were doing at the time, all going to the same wine and whiskey shows and doing all these things. Gradually, our market here grew, which was great. But for me, we were selling what Sullivans Cove back in the day, we were selling 90% of what we were bottling overseas. And it was a much easier thing to sell overseas. There was no excise involved for us. Money was in the bank before it left the distillery. In Australia, we had to pay excise up front. We didn't get paid quite often for 2 or 3 months after we sent it to one of our distributors here in Australia. So it was a really tough thing to have to get through selling in Australia. So for me, it was much easier and to sell overseas. So it taught me a lot about that. And I spent a lot of time traveling around overseas, which was really good in a lot of ways. But I quickly learned that we just didn't have any stock. We thought we did. I can remember standing in our warehouse and we had about 1,000 casks of whiskey at the time. I thought, God, that's a lot of whiskey. But how are we going to sell it all? It just seemed like it was too much. But once we started getting these orders overseas, we were getting container load orders. I mean, I was used to half a pallet or a pallet, but no, a container load. And we're thinking, oh, right, this is fantastic. But when I worked out if I actually put however many container loads together in a year, we'd be out of whiskey within a couple of years, and we just didn't have the facility to recreate it. So we had to pull out of that, which was an amazing thing to think about that. But Australia kicked in as that first 10 years came through. We'd had our success overseas, which gave us the money to keep producing. But now that's being sold. Well, the idea was to sell that within Australia, because we felt we needed to build our name here in our own country first, if you like. I'm not sure whether that was the right thing to do or not, but that's what we felt was the right thing to do at the time. And once we got the ball rolling here in Australia, we found we were selling all that we could bottle in any one year, mostly in Australia. A smaller percentage was going to our old overseas markets. We kept them going, but only in smaller quantities.
So Patrick, again, we talk about Maguire and Co, your new distillery in a sec, but historically, this stuff you're talking about, it's gold. It's fascinating. What did you see in that period of time? What did you see once the Australian market came online for Sullivans or for the industry? What did you start to see changing in the industry here or in the distilleries and how they were going about that here in Australia?
Once we'd got to a certain point, like there was all the existing distilleries like Lark, Heliers Road, Starwood was coming online. All these places were starting to get somewhere. And we started to build a bit of respectability for our product. We were no longer an interesting novelty. We were becoming a credible product. And people started to seek us out and all that sort of stuff. So it was quite pivotal. There was quite a big change there, probably around 2012, 13, something like that, where we were selling all our whiskey consistently throughout the year. And we're in demand. We had people turning up wanting it. So there was a massive change there. But together with that, more distilleries started setting up, which was a great thing, because the more distilleries set up, and particularly right around the country, the more people were exposed to their products. So whether it's whiskey, gin, whatever it happened to be. And now we've gone from a country that wasn't really a spirits drinking country to a country that understands spirits better. We're learning about drinking things like whiskey and brandy and rum and all these things that are now being made. And of course, the gin is everywhere. Australians are drinking a lot of our own spirits now, which is a fantastic thing, I think. So, but together with that, we had organisations like yours come along. The education side of it started to come in, and that was something that we didn't really have before. But now we've got access to more education. So that is a really important thing. I think for any industry to go ahead, we need to be able to get the right education, the right instruction about what we're doing. That's a really important part of it. But coopers, still a problem. I mean, we need more coopers in this country. That coopering casks for spirits is a different thing for coopering casks for wines. But we're also learning about how can we use the casks that the wineries use. So what we're doing here in Australia is a little bit different in some ways to what they're doing in Scotland and other places, because we have that availability of wine casks. So that's become a bigger thing. We've now got still manufacturers in this country that, not that many years ago, you were struggling to find anybody to build you a still in this country of any size anyway. So there's lots of spin-offs from it. Distribution was always problematic and probably still is. Finding people to actually distribute for you was a tough thing to do. But now there are distributors who just deal with Australian spirits or Australian beers, wine, spirits, all that sort of stuff. So a lot of that has developed, has grown, has changed. And so it's easier now to operate in this distilling space than it was back in those days. But that's only to be expected. But the good thing about it is that we all kept going. And the industry has grown, and now I can call it an industry. Not that many years ago, you wouldn't call it an industry. It was a loose collection of a few oddball distillers. But now we're the real article, and things are growing. There is definite interest overseas, definite interest in Australia. So we've come a long way in the time we've been doing this.
And Pat, that's a lovely segue then to talk about 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 opening the doors. Maguire and Co. Tell us about the new distillery.
Well, yeah, that's we hope we open the doors in 2025. We haven't quite got there yet, but no, that'll be any day now. The new distillery that I'm involved in now is called Maguire and Co. Distillery, and this one we're setting up. This has nothing to do with Sullivans Cove in any way, or Lark or any of those. So totally independent of any of that. Different ownership, different everything. But what we've done is we're in the process of building a distillery. If anybody knows Tasmania, it's on the road, on Richmond Road, which is between Cambridge, near the airport, the Hobart, and Richmond. We bought a farm property there, something like 75 hectares, with the idea that we didn't want neighbours close by, but we wanted to be on a tourist route. So that's a very good tourist route along that road there. But we wanted some distance from neighbours because we'll be storing a lot of barrels of whisky. And so we didn't want to be in a place where, there's a lot of other industry around us or houses or whatever. So, and we had the room to grow. So that was part of our thinking. Where in all my time in distilling, we've always had to, every couple of years we'd find we had to move to a bigger warehouse. And every time we move to a bigger warehouse, we think, oh, this will last us years. We'll never fill this up. Within a couple of years, you're looking for a bigger warehouse again. So what we've done this time is we've approached this with a bit of a future-proofing thing in mind. The distillery right now, the buildings are bigger than what we need right at the moment. But I'm hoping that within 10 years or whatever, we'll have the place full. So we've got enough space to do that. But we're starting off with enough equipment, enough space, enough bond stores to produce what we believe we will need to sell interstate and also internationally when we finally get to market, which will be a number of years away yet. So we're not opening the door as far as sales go yet, because we've got nothing to sell. But we are confident that we can produce a very, very good single malt. And we are confident there will be a market out there waiting for us when we get to the other end. So there's nothing like having a bit of confidence, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, I'm sure that will be the case, Patrick. I mean, given your passion for producing a high quality spirit and your background, I mean, it's a wonderful combination to take into a new distillery. We haven't talked about size, if we're allowed to talk about size. Can you give the audience an idea of the size of the distillery and the size of the stills, or how much you'll produce, you think, once you get going?
Yeah, well, we're starting off with 2 stills, a wash still and a spirit still. We'll be doing all our own milling, mashing, fermenting on site. The wash still has it's a 16,000 litre wash still with a capacity of 12,500 litres, which will then go to a spirit still of about 6,500 litres. That's about 8,000 something litres in size. That'll give us enough spirit, 1 shift a week, 5 days a week, to produce what we believe we need to seriously look at the international market in the years to come. So that'll give us around about 350,000 litres a year of unique spirit, which will translate to something like 35,000 9-litre cases a year, or 12 cartons of 12 700ml bottles. So that's the starting point. If you seriously want to go international and be able to back it up with some sort of volume, we feel we need to go to market with that sort of thing behind us. In the past, we've gone to the market with a fraction of that. We did really well. We could have sold a lot more, but we just couldn't supply. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than not being able to supply. It's funny, you go from not being able to sell to not being able to supply, and they're 2 different things, and they're both difficult to deal with. So this time we've got the partnership behind us who can not only fund it, but we can market it and we can distribute it. So within the group that we've got all the right mix of people that are invested in this, that can all play a very important role in all these different things, and including the hospitality end as well when we get there. We haven't built a hospitality bit yet. That's yet to come. There's no point in having a hospitality facility or a sales facility if you've got nothing to sell. So that will come in a couple of years' time.
And Patrick, you've gone big, you've gone with scale. I mean, aside from the fact you're talking about reaching that international market, are there any other decisions about why you decided to go big? Like, are you looking into your crystal ball a couple of years down the track and saying, this is going to be the opportunity? I mean, it's going to take you, what, 2, 5, 7, 10 years before you get the product you want, I'd guess.
Yeah, it will. It'll be more like 8, 10 years. But yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I finished up with Sullivans Cove at the end of 2019, and 2020, COVID came along. So myself and my wife, we were sitting at the house for all those months, and we started to do silly things like talk about, what happens if we set up another distillery? What would we do? And for somebody who's just spent the last, 20 odd years working at a distillery, I didn't think I'd be thinking that straight away. But anyway, that's what happened at the time. So we looked at the idea of, do we set up something just for the 2 of us? We find somewhere where we can set up at a really small distillery, operate it. We don't want to employ anybody. But then we thought the amount of work involved in that, and I'd already been through this with Sullivans at its early stages, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of hands-on work all the time. You never get a break from it. I thought, no, I don't want to do that again. So if we're going to do this, it probably has to be bigger than what we were doing before, because I didn't want to go into it not being able to supply again. So I thought, well, at the time, we don't have pockets big enough to do that, because that's a very big thing. And it's a lot of years before you've got something you can sell. So it's not something that we could do between the 2 of us. So, but at that time, one of my old distributors from Melbourne gave me a call. This was just after I finished up at Sullivans, and put this idea to me that we set up a distillery. And I said at the time, I'd only just finished with Sullivans. I said, look, if you're serious, give me a call in a year. Anyway, all that time passed, and pretty much the day, Adam Sebastiano, who was one of the guys behind Ali Pat Taylor, who were our distributors in Melbourne for a number of years, rang me again and said, right, I'm coming to Hobart, you and me, we're having a coffee or a beer or something, we're going to talk about this. So he put the idea to me, and by that time, Sheila and myself had sort of talked about this idea of we needed to go bigger rather than small. And so I thought, well, okay, these guys, I thought they did have what was required to do it. They are actually interested in the whole family group. They are really interested in whiskey. They are whiskey drinkers. They know what they're doing. They've got bottling facilities. They have winemakers. They're all these things. They bottle a lot of spirits in Australia. So I thought, well, these would be good partners to have, but what about the hospitality side? What about the sales and the marketing side and all that? So that wasn't there. But then I got talking to other people, Demetrius Gonzalez, who's got a very strong marketing background, selling whiskies and spirits internationally for one of the bigger international companies around the world. So he came with a lot of experience, and he was looking for something to do in Tasmania. So I said, well, look, let's all have a talk. And next thing you know, we've got our distribution and our marketing person there. So that was working well. Next thing we needed was hospitality. So we got through Adam and his family. They knew a guy that has a lot to do with the restaurant businesses in Melbourne. So Josh Bishop, who's got some very, very good establishments over there. So all of a sudden we had our hospitality side of it covered. So I thought, okay, we've got all the right team. We can probably do this. So then we set about, okay, if we're going to build a distillery, what's that going to be? So that's where and it took us, I don't know, a couple of years through that process. By the time we found the land, bought that, talked to architects, got all that sort of thing going, got all the right people in as far as, well, okay, we can build a building, but what are we going to put in it? What about all the equipment, all the expertise around that, all the engineers that need to get their heads around what we're doing and the volumes of alcohol that we'll be storing and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot in it. And I mean, I dabbled around the edges before with Sullivans in a small way, and I kind of knew what the rules were. But when you delve into it and you're building something from scratch at this scale, it's a whole different ballgame. So it's been a really good experience going through it. And I think for all of us, it's been a good experience. And we've all had input into that because, and we also wanted the approach that we didn't want to be fighting the authorities and the rules behind what we have to do. We just wanted to work within the system that's there, get our heads around why some rules are in place, and some of these things are very expensive things to implement. But once you've done it, you've done it. And we want everybody to operate in a safe place. We want everything to work properly. We want good gear. If we're going big, we want to make sure it operates smoothly. We don't want to be shut down for a week, trying to fix something. So we decided we'd do it as best as we possibly could.
And Patrick, I've been out to your wonderful place. Obviously, still in process of being finalised. Has the journey of creating it, going through all of those various layers of compliance, building it, connecting it, been as you expected it was going to be? Has it taken longer? Has it cost more than you thought it would?
Well, no, it hasn't taken longer. I mean, it's a fairly big project. And yes, it's taken longer than we were told by the builders and the fabricators. But really, in my experience with getting anything built, you ask somebody like that a question, when is this going to be finished? And they'll pull a figure out of the air, really. They'll give it their best guess. No question about that. But we all know it's going to take longer. So I actually think it's gone really well. And each step of the way, you sort of as it's being developed, you understand more about what's got into that particular part of what's being built or set up. So I'm quite happy with the timeline that it's been. We're almost there. In fact, we've started the commissioning process. We're not producing just yet, but it's not far away. So we've got some barley, some malt in one of the silos now, and the fabricators, who are, by the way, a company called Stillsmiths or Colmark. They are metal fabricators here in Tasmania. I'm amazed at their abilities and the things that they can do. They've got their heads around what stills are and how it all works, mash tuns, all these things that they're doing. It's quite amazing. And they're putting together all the operating system behind it, all that they've got access to the people that do all these things. So to think that there's a company like that that operates in Tasmania at this scale is amazing. I mean, they did Cullington Mill. They've done their own Western Tiers distillery. It's quite incredible what they can do. And we went with them because they're here in Tasmania. They clearly demonstrated they could do the job and do it really well. But more importantly to me as an operator, I want to know that if something breaks down or something is starting to break down, we can have that repaired or rebuilt by the people that actually built the equipment in the first place. They've got all the patents, they've got the expertise, and they're just up the road. So could we have got it cheaper if we bought gear from overseas? Maybe. But could we get it put together and have the ongoing maintenance at a cheaper price? Probably not. So to me, the ongoing maintenance is just as important as the initial build. But look, we're about to start, hopefully, I wouldn't say January now, but probably February, March. I mean, it's going to take a little while for everything to be commissioned so that everything's working properly. There's still a little bit of work to be done on the site. But just through what they're commissioning right now, we can see that things are working pretty well already. So, it'll be good to get all the builders leave and we can just get on with it. I'm really looking forward to that bit.
And Pat, just talking about the investment, you don't have to talk to me about what the numbers were, but when you got your partners in for this venture, were they bringing expertise or were they coming in as funding partners for the business?
Both. So that was all a very important part of it. I mean, the cost was something we talked about before, that we wanted to spend X amount. It is costing more. That's only to be expected, I think. But the quality of what we got, though, I think is well worth it. But we have cut things down. And believe it or not, when you look at it, it's hard to imagine, but we've actually cut the size of things down a bit. We've cut about a third off the buildings. And we've only built 4 of the 11 bond stores that we wanted to build. We'll be building more bond stores probably this year. But the cost of building has gone up a lot in this last few years, and it's very hard to predict what prices are. So it has got a bit scary with the amount of money that we've spent. And now we've got to spend money on, buying all the materials to produce the spirit with, all the barrels that we've got to mature it in and all that sort of stuff. So the price continues to go up. Well, not go up, but there'll be a lot of money spent before we're actually turning a dollar. But the guys themselves, the partners in this, are funding it themselves. We're not going out to borrow. And they've all got various areas of expertise within themselves. I already mentioned the marketing side of it. There's the bottling side of it. There's distribution, hospitality. So they've all got a role to play, a very active role to play in every part of the business. So they're, in my view, they're exactly the right people to have on board for doing this.
And how did you, you said that you knew those folks. Were you clear in your mind when you asked those folks to join you that you wanted somebody with the marketing and you wanted someone with the distribution, et cetera, et cetera? Is that kind of how you made that decision?
Well, it's not quite like that. It wasn't me that were looking for them. It was they're the ones that came to me, or some of them did. So, I was still prepared to put my feet up for another couple of years. But they
and drive forklift around somebody else's distillery for a while. I know you. I know how that works. I know that's where you get your joy, isn't it? Driving forklifts around the distillery.
Well, I actually enjoy. What I don't like is sitting in front of a computer all day, just looking at spreadsheets and doing all that. When you're just up in the office and you don't get to go down to the still room, it's not the best day, I think. So I actually like filling casks, and I like running the still and doing all the tasting and working out what are we going to bottle and all this sort of stuff. That's the good bit about distilling. Sitting in office is not my idea of a good day. So this time around, I'm hoping that I'm going to spend more time in the distillery itself, and somebody else will be doing that other stuff. But once again, within the partnership, we've got people that can do that. So that is really good. So I think we've got all the right people in place already. And not only that, we've got George Gunn, who's our farmer. So on the property where our partners also, or some of our partners have also bought the farm next door. So we've got enough what have we got? Oh, 300 and, I don't know, 70 hectares of land or something. We've got a crop of barley growing on site at the moment that'll be harvested probably in the next couple of weeks. So we're not producing all of our barley requirements, but we hope to be producing a reasonable amount of it in years to come. And some of that will be our own estate grown barley. So we've got a farmer who's managing all the property for us, and there's sheep running around and barley being grown, all sorts of other crops. So it's a really exciting thing to be a part of. We're also about to put some vines in as well, because I quite like making a little bit of brandy. So we're going to have a little bit of an offshoot from time to time, and we'll produce a bit of brandy as well, just to keep things interesting for ourselves. So there's a lot going on, and it's a really nice spot to be. We're not in an industrial or light industrial area. We're out there in the paddocks, and it's the whole thing just has a really nice feel about it. So another person that we've got in there that is bringing a lot of expertise to what we're doing. And this year already, this is his first run at producing malting quality barley on this site, and it looks like it's coming up to spec.
Fantastic.
So, there's a lot of good things in place. All we've got to do is get the whisky right, get it matured right, and hopefully there'll be markets out there for us when we get there.
Well, I had a wonderful question actually to ask you about how important place is in where your distillery is based in your story and in your marketing. And I think to a large degree you've kind of answered that question with your comments there. But, aside, because I have been to that place, it's beautiful. You're surrounded by wineries. There's chocolate place down the road. Stand on the hill and look out at the bay in the distance. Like, it's actually, it's quite lovely. It'll be more lovely, of course, once it's turned on and producing whiskey. But is that part of your marketing story? Is that important to you, that whole picture?
Yeah, look, it is. We deliberately went out and thought about, okay, what do we need? What sort of site do we want? Do we need? So the fact that we're on one of the biggest tourist road in the state is an important thing. Not that we're going to be, we're not relying on tourism for what we're doing. We'll be relying on our export markets and our interstate markets for what we're doing. But I think it's important for interested people to come and see how we make whiskey. I think this is still part of the education process that we need, us as producers need to do and this is why I love the idea of all the distilleries that are set up, not only in Tasmania, but around Australia. A lot of they're all really friendly people, and you can go in there and you can learn about how these things are made, whether it's gin, brandy, whiskey, rum, whatever it is. There's a big education process going on, and that itself is some of the best marketing you can do. So to be easily available to people, and to have something to show people, and we'll be able to say, well, this whiskey was produced from barley that we grew on that paddock. And this is the process that we have to go through to get it from that paddock into this bottle.
Brilliant.
Yeah, look, I think all these things are really important. Not everybody has to do that. In the past, we weren't in that. Well, I wasn't operating a business in that sort of place, but we did like showing people what we were doing because I felt it was important that our consumers understand what it is they're drinking, where it comes from, how it's made, why it costs what it costs, the years it takes to mature, and what goes on with that. Because at the end of the day, our markets are, or our potential market are consumers that are interested in what they're eating and drinking. They're educated people. They're prepared to spend the money on something if they see that they're getting the right value for that money they're spending. They want to know how their food and their beverages are produced. It's not just a matter of going to the shop and filling the trolley with stuff you don't care about. They do care about it. So it's up to us to make ourselves available to them. So we've got to create the right space for that. And we've also got to do a really good job in producing the product. So good that they'll want to come back and keep buying it. That's the trick. It's never about selling a bottle once. It's about selling that to one person. It's about selling to that person over and over and over again. But they feel they're getting value for money.
You're really talking about creating a wonderful relationship, aren't you, between
you are.
yourself and your product.
Well, anybody that produces anything is doing that.
Mm.
So I think for us here in Tasmania or Australia in general, I mean, Australia is known for producing whiskies and these sorts of things. It is now really well known for producing wine. We've got to work hard, us as an industry have got to work hard to get Australia known for producing whiskey as well. So, and that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of development. I think we need to, I think it's safe for people to get bigger and produce more. I know things are a little bit tough at the moment, but there's a lot of other markets out there apart from our own. So I think there's massive potential for people to sell overseas, but they'll need the stock to do it.
Pat, what do you love most about growing this new business?
Well, this is the bit of any business that I like. It's, we've taken this as a group from conception through design, working through what we think our markets are, the whole, everything from start to finish. We're almost at the end of the build process. And now, hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be kicking into gear and we'll be producing. And this is where lots of things are happening. All the things that you had in your head are actually in front of you. You're seeing the barley come in. The hard part is waiting all these years for it to mature. But we will have, we'll be doing plenty of tasting along the way. We want to make sure that things are maturing well. We've designed these bond stores around long-term maturation. I just want to see how it develops. We're going for larger format casks, 200 and 300 litre casks, and we want that long-term. So it's a long wait to get to the other end, but this is the good bit. This is the bit where we get to put all our thoughts into operation. And so, to me, one of the nicest things you can do is to produce a product, particularly a food product, and there's nothing better than you go somewhere and somebody says to you, "Oh, I had built whiskey the other day, it was fantastic." That to me is the ultimate. Just that alone. I mean, awards are nice and everything else, and they can certainly help you sell stuff, but there's no greater feeling than somebody telling you you've done a great job. Whereas in a previous job I had where I spent most of my life looking down a microscope, nobody at the other end of that is going to tell me I've done a good job. Not that you're doing it for that reason, but it's so much nicer producing something that you've thought about right from the start, right through to the finish. And then somebody said, "Oh, you've done a great job. That's good."
Yeah, look, I completely agree with you. We are so lucky to be able to catch up with students that have done some education with us. And without question, for me, that is the best experience to have someone say, "Gee, that's made a difference for me." So I can 100% get that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, that's what we're doing it for, really. I mean, it's just a nice thing to be able to do. And the other side of this, for me, being one of the longer operating distillers in this country, around whiskey anyway, is seeing this whole industry grow. This is the good bit. And that is kind of why, even though I was stepping out there for a while, during that quiet 2020 period there, I just thought, well, there's a lot going on. And the industry's only getting to the point where it's really gathering speed. And, the way the Australian Distillers Association in particular is operating now, I mean, that's a truly national thing. And, originally our conferences, if I call them that, for a couple of beers at the pub somewhere about, between 4 or 5 of us. And now we've got hundreds of people coming to it. We've got guest speakers from all over the world with all these suppliers turning up to show us what they've got. And that's the other good bit. There's new things being developed that we can use as distillers in various parts of the process. The mobsters are coming to us saying, "What do you want?" Instead of us just having to ride on the coattails of the big breweries around the country. They're now actually talking to us and getting specific about what we need. So we're getting to a really good point in the development of this industry. So to me, it would have been a shame to leave it just as we're getting to that point. Because the group, that small group of the original ones of us, worked hard to get to that. So we'd be kind of ashamed to leave it.
Yeah, you just needed a little holiday, mate, before you came back. That was all. Just a little
holiday. That was good.
A little holiday. Now, speaking of innovations, what would be one of the coolest innovations or products that you've seen in the industry as you've travelled about? Anything that you've thought, oh my God, that is so cool. What have you seen?
For me, whiskey's it's a fairly simple process. So there's not a lot that needs to be changed, or nothing that hasn't already been done. When you look overseas at some of the distilleries around the place, they're pretty magnificent places, and they've got a lot of infrastructure. They've got a lot of expertise. They've got a lot of systems that help them do what they do, particularly once they get to size. So one of the problems I used to have was I got quite good at Excel spreadsheets because that was the only way I could control everything. And so I'd sit there all day, with these Excel spreadsheets, and that's how we recorded everything that we did. And that's cumbersome, and it's not that efficient. And it only allows us to store so much information. So one of the things I'm excited about this time around is we've got the backing to put in a system, an ERP system that can control every part of the business, the financial side of it, the input side of it, the output side of it. Everything can be done through this system. And we've only just discovered that. Well, I've only just discovered it recently. And for distilleries of our size, which when you look at globally, it's still tiny. It's big for us here, but you look at anything they're doing overseas, we're still a tiny operation. So unless you're one of those giants of the industry that can afford all this IT stuff, which we can't, there wasn't many places to go. So some other people have got together, and this particular product we're using is from the US, where their distilling community is going gangbusters. They've really grown enormously in the last few years. So there's now space for people to develop stuff for smaller operators. And so that's what we're doing. So it's really nice to see that being implemented as part of what we're doing. And we've got the expertise here in Australia to actually do that. So we're going to be held by the hand through that process as we sort of go into getting operating. So we've got guys on the ground now actually learning about how to operate all that. I've already had a bit of a go at it, so I can see the benefit of that. And that for us is going to be hugely important in controlling what we do. And also for people in the future, say in 10 or 20 years' time, when they want to come and bottle the stuff that we're producing today, they'll know what type of grain we used, where we got the grain from, what yeast we used, what the recipe was that went into the still that day, where the barrels came from, what were they used for in the past. So there'll be a whole lot of history that we can attach to every bottle. And we can get that through this system. Whereas before, we had to do it through memory, me typing things down on the spreadsheet, getting the spelling wrong and wondering what the hell I wrote down 10 years ago. That to me is a key part of what we're doing and what we want to present in the future. It'll really help us tell our story. Okay, this barley was from this paddock, or we got it from elsewhere in Tasmania, or wherever we got the barley from. So these things are being developed now.
That's wonderful, Pat. That really is a crystal ball. That really is a crystal ball gazing exercise right there.
Yeah. None of us who are here today doing this might be here in 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years' time. But whoever is there in 100 years' time, they can look back and the information will be there for them in pretty good detail. So that's a big step for me anyway, as a smaller operator.
Pat, I've known you for 10 or so years now, since we met at Sullivans Cove. And I think one of the features has always been you've talked about future-proofing the distillery. So you were talking about that with Sullivans Cove back 10 years ago. Mm. So I'm not at all surprised that you're thinking that way 100 years down the track, or whatever the magic number is.
You kind of got it. And to make it worse, we've also, as I said, the building is bigger than what we need. We've got 5 fermenters in at the moment, a mash tun and 2 stills. We've got enough space there, and it's all set up so that we put in another couple of stills, another 5 fermenters, and so on. So we've already got the space within that building to do it, and we could put more in than that if we wanted to. But I don't know how many years it's going to take before we get to where we'll be 1 shift 5 days a week to start with. We could do 3 shifts 7 days a week and produce over 1 million litres a year. But we're a little way off for that. We've got to prove we can actually sell it first. We can actually produce it well package it, sell it, mature it more than anything else.
How exciting. You must be so excited about this.
Well, I'm sort of a bit over sitting on my hands with this. Every month goes by and I think, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And we nearly are there. We thought we would be operating in December. Well, actually, we thought we'd be operating in November, but no, it's now January. It could be February. We'll see. But we are really getting there now. So it won't be long.
So given that experience, Pat, somebody asked you what do I need to think about to open a distillery? What's the one piece of advice you would give them?
Well, if you ignore everything I've just said about size and future proofing and all that, I would say don't spend too much money on equipment initially. If you're starting off small, it's amazing how much money will be required to actually produce the spirits you want to make and then to market it. So spend as little as possible on your equipment. Get good equipment, but you don't have to go silly. You don't need 2 stilts. You don't need fancy fermenters or all these things. You can get by for a while and make a very, very good product without spending a lot on gear. You really need to spend your money on quality ingredients. The barley you need, the yeast, the cask you're going to use will take a lot of money. And then you need to mature it properly too, which takes years. So it's a very expensive thing to do without much income for a long time. So that's what I would say to anybody that wants to get into it. I think there's plenty of space in the industry and there's potential for an enormous amount of markets. The markets are interested, but don't spend all your money on gear.
No, that sounds like good advice, Pat. Now, look, we're going to finish up with a visioning exercise. It's not scary as it sounds. I want you to imagine you're actually having a holiday. Not likely, I don't think, in the next year. But anyway, imagine you're having a holiday and you're in the ski fields with your favourite people and your favourite drink. Okay, so where exactly are you? What are you drinking?
Oh, we're at a ski field. Wow.
Oh, well, you could be on a yacht.
Well, I could be on a yacht, but a ski field's good. It's good whiskey drinking country. Well, one of my favourite ski resorts is Maguire in France. And I did actually do this a few times. Myself and my wife, Sheila, we sat there at a little bar, and I can't think of the name of it. And there's nothing better than at the end of the night, if you've been out on the snow all day, you come back, have a good meal, a couple of glasses of red, but then you sit back in front of a fire somewhere and just have a really nice whiskey. And you just sit there and sip it. There's nothing better than that for me.
What are you drinking? What's your whiskey? What's your whiskey of choice or your brandy? Or I do know you have a bit of a thing for cognac.
Brandy's in general. I quite like brandy. I don't know why brandy is more popular in this country. I really don't. But look, it's many and varied. There's no one spirit, if you like, or one particular brand other than the obvious, which is I was fortunate enough to go and have sample some of the whiskies at Sullivans Cove that I had a hand in making, several years ago now. They've bottled some of those and they were, anywhere between 12 and probably 16 years old or whatever it was. And I have to say the American Oak single cask bottlings and particularly the second fill example was just lovely. It had the right amount of flavour, a really nice creamy mouth-filling sort of mouthfeel, oily flavours just sat there, and you could have sat on that glass all night. That to me is just priceless. That's what I was aiming for, and the way the guys there, Heather and Kirsten and so on, have treated that, looked after those barrels and picked them at their best. You can't beat it. Like that. That's what it's about for that particular distillery, and they did that really well. But in my time outside that, when I was having a holiday, I decided I needed to recalibrate my tongue, and because I was a bit Sullivan-centric and also Australian whiskey-centric. And so I got back to Scotch. And I've discovered I keep on going back to Glenfiddich 12 of all things. It's just a lovely whiskey. But that too, to me, it's a subtle whiskey. You can get to the grain. You can get to the malt. That's what whiskey is about to me. And you could do that with the Sullivan's American Oak second fill. You can get to the malt. And that's what I'm looking for in a whiskey. There's lots of interesting flavours out there and a lot of fortified casks and all the rest of it. But to me, I prefer the very simple American oak matured whiskies. To me, they're lovely. And that's what we're meant to be drinking. We're drinking that malt, we're drinking that barley. So I like to find that there. So there's two good examples, if you like.
Wow. So, Patrick, I look forward to seeing what we get. I don't know, it might not even be 2030, but let's go. Maybe we might get a whiskey out of Maguire and Co. in
Well,
2030.
we have been buying new make whiskey from a few other distilleries around Tassie for a few years now. And we've got some 6-year-old there at the moment, but only a handful of casks. So we're not ready to go to market with that yet. But in a couple of years' time, we probably will. But that'll be under an independent label, if you like it. I'm not sure what we're going to brand it yet. And I'm not sure when we'll put it in a bottle. But once again, we'll be waiting for when enough casks are right to actually bottle. But I doubt there'll be single cask bottlings. I think it'll be more of putting a whole lot of casks together and creating something out of those, which is the direction we're really going to go with what we're doing at this distillery at Maguire and Co. So, but you never know. We'll see what rabbits we pull out of the hat as we go along. If we find casks that are absolutely exceptional, then I think there's plenty around there for a few single cask bottlings as well. But I don't want to make that our main thing.
Fantastic.
Main
Well,
thing.
I reckon 2030. Let's pour a glass of something and celebrate what I'm sure will be some wonderful milestones in the next 5 years for Maguire and Co. Seems like a long time, but it's actually not really. Not in the life of a whiskey.
Not in distillers' terms, it's not.
No. And look, thanks for your time here today. I think this story is unfolding from Maguire and Co. So it'd be nice to touch
stop
base.
Again.
Yes, absolutely. Let's bump into each other and share some more stories in another year or two.
Yeah, well, as I said, hopefully we'll be getting past the commissioning stage in the next, I don't know, hopefully by the end of this month, possibly into February. But once we do that, we'll have to get you out there and come and have a look and see us actually put a run through or something like that, provided they'll let us do that. Trust us with the keys to the distillery. We'll see how we go.
Could be fun. Could be a big day out.
Yeah. And I'll let you know.
Sounds good. All right, Patrick. Well, thank you so much again for your time today. I'm sure that the folks that are listening or watching this little recording are going to be delighted by your story. I know I am. Every time I hear something, I discover something new. And, I feel pretty lucky also having you as a good distilling buddy here in Tassie. So thanks again for your time.
Well, thanks for your time. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.